Hello everyone, welcome to this series. This is a series of games played between Garry Kasparov and Anatoly Karpov in the year 1985 for the World Chess Championship. Karpov was 34 years old then, and Kasparov was a young man with only 22 years old. Karpov was then the world number one with 2720 rating, and Kasparov was close behind with 2700 rating as world number two. They played the championship in 1984 as well, but it was 5 months long, and it was adjourned by the officials. It was very confusing as to why it ended the way it did. That match had 48 games, and Karpov was leading 5-3, but it was 5 months long, and uh, it was stopped halfway through. The current World Championship 1985 was limited to only 24 games, and the first person to score 13 is going to 13 or 12 and a half basically is going to win the tournament rather than having a pretty long tournament. So without further ado, let's see the game number. Goes for his d4. Karpov replies with knight f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, bishop to b4. So we have the nimzo-indian here. The contest is going to be for this e4 square. Black is willing to give up his bishop pair for a lead in development, where he castles and has a fluent development, and he controls the center e4 square. Later he strikes at the center with either c5 or d5. So Kasparov goes for the knight f3 variation, which is not the most popular variation. There was queen c2, say e3, or so even bishop g5. Yeah, let's Kasparov goes for knight f3, the three knights variation. If Karpov goes for d5, this would be a queen's gambit declined Ragozin variation. He goes for c5 instead, striking at the center right away. Right now in the database you see that g3 is the main line, but back then g3 was not that common, and Karpov has said that he was actually very surprised to see that Kasparov played this variation, and he wasn't prepared for this. So g3 by Kasparov, planning to fianchetto his bishop and gaining more control over this e4 square, I guess. So the main line here is you just take the pawn and then continue with the development. But Karpov goes for knight to e4, challenging this knight right away, saying that okay, you are not protected and pinned. Yeah. So Kasparov goes for queen d3, protecting the knight as well as asking this knight a question. What are you going to do? Are you going to fall back, or are you going to take? Karpov plays queen a5, putting more pressure on this knight. Kasparov could have played bishop d2, putting more defense for this knight, but instead he opted for queen takes e4 and bishop takes c3. Yeah, you can't take here, because if you take, there is queen takes and then you lose the rook. So bishop d2. Now this bishop is pinned, so there is no other move than takes and knight takes. Queen to b6 now, putting more pressure on this b2 as well as d4 pawn. Yeah, I don't think there is a way to save both. Yeah, Kasparov takes this pawn and lets this pawn fall. Rook to b1. So if you see, this is not the purpose of nimzo-indian, right? In nimzo-indian, black willingly gives up his bishop pair for a lead in development. But as you can see here, I think white is better at development than black here. How is this bishop going to come out? I mean, this square and this square both are pretty occupied by this by the c5 pawn. So yeah, I think uh, Karpov must have understood by this point that he messed up the opening, right? He's not getting a lead in development, and other than the queen, which is going to be kicked around by a lot of pieces right now, pieces and pawns right now, I think there is no development by any of the pieces. Even he has not castled yet. So for that reason, I mean, Karpov gives up taking up this pawn, because uh, you could take a pawn, but queen to d4, where you strike at this point, and castles, and rook to a1, queen to c2, bishop to g2. Yeah, it's not looking good for black, and I mean, some of us may blunder as white here, because you are a pawn down, and there is a fractured pawn structure here, with black having this incredible a passed pawn. But yeah, not at the world championship level. This queen has no real bright prospects, and this bishop has no bright prospects. It's not looking good uh, for uh, uh, for black. So exactly for this reason, uh, so uh, Karpov opts for queen c3, uh, pinning this knight, so that uh, you can't really castle, and there is no other way other than just maybe he wanted to take the queens off the board, which I think Kasparov also obliged. So Kasparov plays queen d3, and now the queens are off. So let's pause for a moment here and see the imbalances in this position. Who has got what? If you see material, white has 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, and black has 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 pawns. So yeah, the material is even. uh, White's pawn structure is a bit damaged, but yeah, is it a negative for white or positive for white is to be seen. Definitely, development wise and space wise, white is much ahead. I think white is for preference here rather than black. This bishop looks sad, and this pawn controls these two very vital squares. If black survives this position and goes to some sort of end game and equalizes, then these three pawns are going to be a liability for white. But yeah, the chances of that happening is remote, and that's why peace activity always trumps. Karpov goes here for knight to a6, striking at this pawn, but could have gone for knight to c6. I mean, the engine says this is a fine move, followed by say b6, king e7, and bishop b7. Uh, I mean, yeah. So this, I mean, white retains a small advantage, but the white knight goes to e4 and then jumps to d6. Could have been one variation, but yeah, he goes for knight to a6 and striking at this pawn right away. So Kasparov plays d4, supporting this pawn, and rook to b8. Yeah, preparing b6, and breaking this structure somehow to free up his bishop. Bishop g2, king to e7. Preparing now d6. So somehow you have to break free because you need some piece activity. Yeah, I mean, So he could have played b6 here as well, right? What's the problem? Does not reveal his cards yet. Which way he's going to break the center? Kasparov goes for king e2 from his side. Maybe marching up this king to one of these two squares where he could put more support to these pawns, because it's not going to be challenged by any piece from black, right? Yeah. So Karpov goes for rook to d8, not revealing the surprise yet. Yeah, I mean d6, b6. Which one is going to be? Yeah, so he wants Kasparov to commit some sort of move, say playing d5 maybe himself, and yeah, just testing the patience here, I guess. Yeah, so Kasparov goes for knight to e4, solidifying this d6 square. If black plays another waiting move, say h6, or I don't know, I mean he'll not play h6, but some sort of waiting move like he has been playing for last few moves, and this knight just sits on d6, and this is going to be really hard now for black to develop anything or break free anything. So this knight here would be a monster. I mean, I don't think it is a 3 point anymore. It's mostly like 5 point or so. Yeah. So Karpov goes for b6 here, challenging this pawn, so that when the knight lands here, you strike uh, at the pawn supporting it. So this knight is not stable here. But anyways, Kasparov just pumps the knight at d6. The knight is too strong here, right? Uh, Putting pressure on this b7 square so that the bishop can't develop, and yeah, it cannot break d6, so yeah, it has to be challenged. So knight to c7, planning knight to e8, just exchanging the strong knight. Kasparov goes for rook to b4, maybe planning to double the rook and then break this tension. And black cannot take now, right? Black cannot take now because this rook is hanged. So knight to e8, Kasparov takes, king to knight to 8, and king takes, and then rook hb1, yeah, doubling on this file. Still Karpov has to solve the same questions. How does he want to improve this bishop? How does he want to improve this pawn and strike at this pawn mass here? Right. So bishop to a6, pinning this pawn here. Maybe then striking in the center with d5. Kasparov dodges the pin with king to e3. Another variation could have been king to d2, but it's effectively the same. Karpov goes for d5 straight away. Yeah, so this gives white an opportunity to undouble his pawns by taking en passant here, d takes d6. The best move here was maybe rook takes d6 or bishop b7, but Karpov goes for rook bc8, putting pressure on this c4 pawn and saying that this d6 pawn is weak and can be picked up later. However, this is a blunder. Try to find out why this is a blunder and how can white take advantage of this while I give you a couple of minutes. So hopefully you guys could see why this is a blunder. If you did not, so it follows this way. So rook a4 by white, asking this bishop a question. Where do you want to go? This bishop does not have any other square other than taking this c4, and then bishop to b7, asking the question to this rook. This rook also doesn't have any other square. I mean, all these squares are taken, so it just has to go back to rook to b8, and then just bishop c6, king to f8, and then simply taking this bishop. And it would have been a piece up by Kasparov and an easy win. However, Kasparov missed this, and uh, he did not take advantage of this blunder. What he did instead was played king to d3. Rook takes d6, rook a4. This bishop has nowhere to go, and the only way to save this bishop is by playing b5, giving up this pawn. So the rook protects the a6 bishop now. So c takes b5, and yeah, rook to b8. Uh, can't take this bishop by this rook or this pawn, because the rook is pinned now. So Kasparov breaks the pin by playing rook a to b4, and this bishop now backs to b7. Then bishop takes bishop, and rook takes bishop, and then a4. So if you see here, Kasparov is clearly a pawn up. There are 6 pawns to 5 by Karpov. So, and yeah, these 2 pawns are really up the board and marching ahead. The king is well placed. Basically, Kasparov has pretty good chance to win here. Black plays king to e7, h4 by Kasparov, h6 by Karpov, and f3 by Kasparov. I mean, taking control of all these squares basically, and no real entry point by the black king or the rooks. Then rook to d5, and rook to c1. So yeah, these really cut off the black king from entering this side, and yeah, these two pawns are pretty lethal and marching up the board. And also rook to c5, and Kasparov is just going to liquidate the position by cancelling the rooks, exchanging the rooks, and it should be easy win for him. Karpov goes for rook b to d7, and a5, just marching these pawns up the board. g5, hg, takes rook takes g5, attacking this pawn now, but g4, and h5 by black, and b6. You don't have the time to take hg here, because this pawn just marches up the board and queens. So ab6 is the only move here. Can't really do rook b7 as well, because after that a6, and rook b6, rook b6, ab6, and rook to a1, and this pawn is now unstoppable. So after b6, Karpov goes for ab6, ab6, and rook to b7. Then Kasparov just plays rook to c5, challenging this rook, as well as if Karpov takes here, then take with this pawn, and these two passed pawns are going to be unstoppable here. This also provides a very nice bridge for the king to cross and support this pawn's queening. f5 by Karpov, a desperate attempt really to break something on this side of the board. But yeah, g takes h5, and rook takes h5, and then king to c4, just allowing a very nice bridge for the king to attack the rook and support this pawn. Rook to h8, and king to b5. rook to a8 now, and rook b to c4. So asking this question and maybe taking one pair of rooks off the board for this pawn. And this is where Karpov throws in the towel and says that it's enough. Yeah, I mean, if you cannot figure out why should black resign here, you can see the games a few steps deep how it would have gone if Karpov hadn't resigned. Say rook to a1, and yeah, rook c7 check, and takes, and there's no way to stop winning this pawn. There you have it. The first game of the match, and Kasparov takes a lead here. This wasn't the best game by Karpov by any means. He just blew the game right off from the beginning. From the opening, he went ahead for this c3 knight when he should have focused on development. So before we close the video, let's see the computer analysis for this game, and see how many blunders, inaccuracies by each player here. So Kasparov, two inaccuracies, two mistakes, and zero blunders, 25 average centipawn loss. Karpov, four inaccuracies, one mistake and one blunder, and yeah, 43 average centipawn loss. So yeah, all in all, Kasparov played much better than Karpov in this game. If you see, most of the time Kasparov had a small edge right from the opening, and yeah, this is where the the edge really was decisive. Somewhere here where this knight takes, knight puts itself on d6, and yeah, and this was a decisive blunder, and yeah, this was also a blunder by uh, Karpov, but Kasparov couldn't take advantage of it. But yeah, this was a blunder. Yeah, and then yeah, after that, yeah, mostly Karpov had no chance of striking back. Kasparov 1, Karpov 0. Let's see how the next games is going to be going to pan out. See you in the next video.